And They All Were Fleeting. Written by Trickstar. Read by Arashi. Ingrid's first crush is laughable. It's not Glenn, like everyone thinks. Looking back at it now, even she is surprised that it isn't. Much more that she'd recognized the crush for what it was. She'd been so young, naive, head filled with dreams and stories that had been instilled in her. She finds herself in awe of how her heart had found the time to skip a beat for someone despite the circumstances. It just happened to choose the wrong person. Because she didn't fall for the dashing, knight-to-be, heir of the noble house Fraldarius. No, Ingrid hadn't fallen for the boy she'd been engaged to since birth. Ingrid was a fool like that. Instead, she'd fallen for his brother. Felix is small and baby-faced when Ingrid first meets him, smile bright and brown eyes twinkling, filling Ingrid's insides with something foreign. Butterflies, she would learn later, as they held each other's gazes. It was so unfair, she heard the maids at Galatée whisper, how beautiful such a young boy could be, and Ingrid had found herself agreeing. Not because it was unfair, but because Felix is beautiful, and the fact made Ingrid's heart race and her cheeks burn. He's shorter than her, only a little, but what he lacks in height, he makes up for in volume. All throughout their first meeting, he is loud, brash, attention-seeking. She'd even heard his own father describe him. But he is beautiful. The crushing disappointment she feels when she first finds out about the engagement could have been alleviated if it had been Felix instead of Glenn, she once thought while crying into her billow, before she eventually comes to her senses and realizes it would have been better if it had been no one at all, because this damns her dreams even more than the world already has. Wife for knight, Ingrid has been taught that she cannot be both. But Ingrid is young, and Ingrid is hopeful, so she plays along. For now, lets her future self be the one that worries about paving her path, the coward's way out. Even then, that's how she'd recognized it. She'd taken it anyway. Because Ingrid is young, and all she needs to concern herself with is her duty, her purpose to her family, her house, her land. That's what she was born for, some would say. So her crush doesn't last. Her crush doesn't last even when Felix makes her feel wanted, recognized for her skill rather than her title, and made her heart beat faster than it ever had before. Despite all these things, Ingrid stomps on her feelings until they are no more, until they are dust under her feet and a forgotten feeling, until Ingrid no longer finds Felix beautiful. She falls for Glenn eventually, and it hurts because he solidifies her dreams, makes Ingrid crave so much more for what she cannot have. Glenn is a perfect caricature of the knight she can never be, the definition of chivalry, bravery, everything. Then he dies. She cries the most at the funeral, more than Sylvain, than Dimitri, even more than Felix. She knows no one's surprised, but she is, because Ingrid isn't a crier, much less a public one, but she can't help it, because damn the universe. Damn the universe for giving her a crest. Damn it for having her fall for Felix, only to have her beat the feelings down and carry them on to the person they were meant for in the beginning. Damn it for killing said person anyway. To add insult to injury, the beauty Ingrid had been so enraptured with when she was younger is tainted in the most horrible way. She can no longer look at Felix without feeling like someone has stabbed her, like something has died within her, like being destroyed. Karma is the worst thing. Ingrid's first crush is laughable, because it had definitely crushed her. Sylvain's crush on His Majesty does not last long. This isn't unusual. Most of Sylvain's crushes never last long, because that's all they are. Crushes. By definition, they aren't meant to last. They are mere infatuations. Shallow. Ill-fated. They didn't mean anything. It's why he indulged in them so often. After all, a little enjoyment is the least he can get from all the leeches coming after him for his crest. It's a twisted line of thinking, he knows. But that's what he's known for, isn't it? Being twisted. A skirt chaser that left more chaos than precious memories in his wake. He's just playing his part by doing this. If a couple of hearts are broken here and there, then so be it. They'd have ruined him more if Sylvain had given them the chance. Luckily, he isn't some of the poor saps he dates. He doesn't confuse lust or the thrill of it all for anything else. For something more. Something meaningful. No, Sylvain never falls in love. But his feelings for Dimitri had raised some questions. They'd bloomed inside of him out of the blue, silent and deadly. They are in the greenhouse, tending to the plants together because Dudu is at a seminar, and Sylvain has nothing better to do than be a good friend. Despite what Felix and Ingrid may say, He could do that. Be a good friend. But, evidently, something in him hadn't been satisfied with that. With friends. Because when Dimitri grins at him from across the flowers with a smile as bright as the sun, suddenly, the only thing Sylvain can hear is his heartbeat thumping loudly in his ears, and how his breath catches at the sight. Oh, he thinks as he recovers, before giving Dimitri his own winning smile. Oh, he thinks as he crouches behind the potted plant he'd been tending to. Oh, he realizes as he stares at his reflection in a nearby watering can. So it's come to this now, has it? He's not surprised. Not really. He'd had a crush on all of his childhood friends at one point. Ingrid in their early years, Felix between that and beginning life at the monastery. But they'd come to pass. Sylvain would rather die than jeopardize what little meaningful relationships he had. Later, when he thinks about it more critically, he's in awe of how Dimitri is the last one he falls for. Because, well, he's Dimitri. Kind to a fault, heart as big as the ocean, dashing as 100 princes combined. The list goes on and on. He's nearly perfect. Nearly. There is one side of him that Sylvain loathes to see, the one born after Dusker. He doesn't like to think about that side of Dimitri, so he doesn't. So, as per usual, he lets the crush play out, lets him get it out of his system. It's the only way he finds peace. He lets his cheeks warm at the sight of Dimitri's smile, lets his heart beat fast when they share a rare hug, lets himself pause to collect himself after their fingers touch. It's normal. It's routine. Until it isn't. Because Sylvain's never thrown himself in front of a sword for any of his crushes before. He's never watched any of them sleep in the infirmary after a particularly arduous training session, never had the urge to kiss someone so strongly. Fuck, Sylvain thinks as he buries his face in his hands, just a chair away from Dimitri's sleeping form. Fuck, he thinks as he heaves a heavy sigh, exhausted and bitter all at once. Fuck, he thinks, as he keeps watching Dimitri sleep. He's messed up badly, it seems. He's gone and fallen in love. Fortunately, he doesn't have time to dwell on it. Flayn is kidnapped, the monastery becomes a mess, and feelings are the least of his worries. He's somehow grateful for this, although he knows it is sick, twisted. But he is Sylvain José Gautier, the definition of twisted. Would anyone really be surprised? In an even more fortunate turn of events, something happens which makes it significantly easier to tramp down his feelings until they fade. The side of Dimitri he doesn't like to think about. It rears its ugly head as they fight the flame Edelgard, and Sylvain is floored. Felix's words echo in his ears as he watches Dimitri slaughter their foes. Boar, Felix had always called their friend, but he's not calling him anything now, just silently watching Dimitri crush two men's skulls like the rest of them. In shock, in disgust, Sylvain doesn't know. Sylvain doesn't want to know. It's morbid, terrifying. Sylvain feels like he's watching a monster feast. It's then when his feelings die, because they wouldn't be able to survive. It's so obvious. A monster and his twisted paramour. It's a recipe for disaster. He can't even stand to think of this side of Dimitri. How is he supposed to brave it out? To accept it? And who knows how badly he could hurt Dimitri. Sylvain could be cruel, but he couldn't do that to Dimitri. He didn't want to. You couldn't put two broken things together and expect something to come out fixed. It didn't work like that. It is the logic he settles on, because he refuses to think about it any further. He turns away from Dimitri in his crazed state, turns away from his feelings. Sylvain's crush on His Majesty does not last long. It is something he makes sure. Dimitri does not count her as a crush. Ingrid has always been more than that. She is his friend, one of his closest, a sister practically. He wasn't Sylvain. She didn't deserve to be labeled as a passing fancy. No one did, really. Even if she had been at one point. It was all Sylvain's fault, he argued, because Dimitri doesn't think about these things. How could he? He is set to be king. He cannot waste his time thinking about things like casual trysts or, goddess forbid, love. It's unthinkable. Improper. No distractions for the Crown Prince of Faerghus. Not at all. But Sylvain had pushed. Kept pushing so hard that Dimitri had finally let his mind wander. If he were to entertain the idea, who would he even fall for? Ingrid had come to mind almost immediately, and he ducked his head and felt his face burn soon after, flustered. It seemed natural to think about his closest female companion, he reasoned out. Ingrid had only come to mind first because she was the obvious choice. Nothing more. Heck, he'd even go as far as to say he'd probably have thought of Mercedes or Annette under different circumstances. The problem with this, though, is that after the thought of Ingrid and more had entered his mind, Dimitri cannot for the life of him get it to exit. How would it feel to kiss Ingrid, to go on dates with her, to hold her comfortingly in the way only lovers could? How would all that feel? Dimitri's mind is plagued with hundreds of questions he can't think of answers to. All he knows is that there is warmth in his chest when he thinks about Ingrid now, and this is bad. He's not proud of how he proceeds to treat her in the days following, and the thoughts he'd so stupidly entertained. He can't meet Ingrid's eyes anymore, shied away from any situations that left the two of them alone, stumbled over his words around her. It's horrible. Dimitri's been reduced to a blushing schoolboy, and it's absolutely horrible. He knows his friends have noticed. How could they not? Dimitri's never blundered around helplessly like this before. Felix's glares turn more questioning than angry. Sylvain becomes a hell of a lot more playful, knowing. Mercedes and Annette giggle at him. Ash even recommends him a book about courting. Even Dudu's silence seems changed. With how obvious he's being, he's not surprised when Ingrid eventually calls him out. She's worried, understandably. She tells him she's never seen him like this, and it puzzles her greatly, and Dimitri shakes his head, offers her nothing but half-truths and empty reassurances. He's not going to tell her. He wouldn't risk their friendship like that, so he holds his tongue and lets time work its magic. The feelings fade eventually. It hadn't taken much. He just thought of other girls, though he'll never admit it, and realized that maybe he'd been enamored by the idea of love, not Ingrid herself. The epiphany fills him with an enormous amount of relief. Experimentation. Curiosity. That's all it had been. He was right. Thinking of Ingrid had only been convenient. Easy. It shouldn't count. So, Dimitri does not have a crush on her. But that doesn't mean she hadn't been at one point. After the war, Felix has barely anything to do. Life is annoyingly dull, bland, boring. His days blur together so much that he's certain that if it weren't for his duties, he'd have lost all sense of time. Wake up, have breakfast, attend to paperwork, scout Fraldarius territory, converse with the locals, have lunch, more paperwork, dinner, sleep, repeat. Felix is sick of it. He swears this is the only reason he looks forward to Sylvain's visits. He's always so loud, insisting on a grandiose entrance every time he sets foot on Fraldarius' property. He'd come on the back of a horse with a rainbow-colored mane once. Felix had made him wait to be led into his estate for an hour. Another time, he brought a bouquet of roses to distribute among all of Felix's female servants. Utterly irritating, yes, but at least Felix hadn't had much use for his sword that day. They talk a lot. Just to talk, is what Sylvain had told him after all, the first time Felix inquired about his intentions. About politics, current affairs, gossip, definitely more Sylvain than him, whatever came to mind. Sometimes their conversations last hours, continuing well into the night. Other times, a mere few minutes, just a quick pop-in from the older man when his destination was elsewhere and matters were urgent. Fool, Felix would call him, because he should know better than to squeeze in a little visit when Sylvain's presence could be needed somewhere else. But he'd always insist, and, eventually, Felix stops nagging. After all, it's a pleasant break from the normalcy he has learned to loathe. He just didn't expect it to have its own repercussions. A handful of brave servants have told him how he's more agreeable when Margrave Gautier is around. Grinned more, laughed more. Felix has heard them whisper, too, of how he is more expressive, more vulnerable around Sylvain. To say it bothers him is an understatement. His servants shouldn't even be gossiping about him in the first place, much less telling him head-on about their ludicrous observations. As much as they are true, that's what irks him the most, because Felix is happier around Sylvain. More calm, less harsh, less critical. Felix actually relaxes around him, jokes around with him. He is significantly more at ease with the man than he is with anyone else. He's not sure how to react to the realization at first, but when his brain finally catches up with him, Felix is puzzled. He's never acted this way around Sylvain before, around anyone really. Felix doesn't know what the attitude change could mean, and it bothers him that he doesn't. He didn't like not knowing things. Dimitri notices, because of course he has to torment Felix so. Even with one eye, he is sharp. But the blonde has said next to nothing regarding the matter, simply patting Felix's shoulder and telling him he'd understand soon. Felix doesn't want to understand soon. Felix wants to understand now. But soon comes faster than Felix expects it to. They're in Felix's study as Sylvain babbles on about the usual things. Ingrid had apparently cut her hair again, the ginger-haired man reports. He'd also had the pleasure of hanging out with Ash and Dedu on his last visit to the palace. Most of it goes in one ear and out the other. Until Sylvain mentions marriage. Felix's head snaps up to meet his eyes so fast, his neck aches. It's about time, Sylvain says nonchalantly, and if Felix didn't know him any better, he'd actually believe Sylvain was looking forward to reviewing marriage prospects. But Felix did know him better. He sees the rigidness in Sylvain's shoulders and the exasperation in his eyes. Hears the sad acceptance in his voice. More so, Felix is entirely aware of the ache suddenly present in his chest. Why did the idea of Sylvain getting married bother him so much? Because it wouldn't be to you, his mind supplies helpfully, and Felix responds with an automatic, duh. It's so obvious. Oh, fuck. Sylvain stops talking when Felix buries his face in his hands and releases the most long-suffering sigh he's ever sighed before. After the war, Felix has barely anything to do. Maybe that's why he falls in love.